For decades, Greenland existed on the margins of global attention. It was a vast frozen landmass, larger than most countries, yet politically quiet, strategically underestimated, and largely ignored by the everyday news cycle. To many, Greenland was simply ice, glaciers, and polar bears. But that perception is no longer accurate. Today, Greenland has become one of the most strategically sensitive territories on Earth, and the reason is simple. The balance of global power is shifting, and Greenland sits directly in the path of that shift. To understand the current situation, we must begin with geography. Greenland is not just an island, it is a geopolitical crossroads, located between North America and Europe, stretching deep into the Arctic Circle. Greenland occupies a position that military planners, intelligence agencies, and world leaders have quietly studied for decades. During the Cold War, the United States recognized this importance early, establishing military installations such as Thule Air Base to monitor Soviet activity across the Arctic. When the Cold War ended, global attention faded, but the strategic value never disappeared. What has changed now is the Arctic itself. Climate change has begun to transform the Arctic from a frozen barrier into an accessible frontier. Melting ice is opening new shipping routes, reducing travel time between Asia, Europe, and North America. Beneath the ice, vast reserves of rare earth minerals, oil, gas, and strategic resources are becoming accessible for the first time. These are not abstract future possibilities, they are present-day calculations being made in Washington, Beijing, Brussels, and Moscow. Greenland sits at the center of this transformation. Although Greenland governs many of its internal affairs, it remains part of the Kingdom of Denmark. This arrangement has long been stable, even if occasionally strained. Greenlanders have pursued greater autonomy. Denmark has provided financial support, and the world paid little attention. That equilibrium has now been disrupted by external forces, far more powerful than domestic politics. In recent months, global rhetoric surrounding Greenland has shifted sharply. Statements from American political leadership, some direct, some deliberately ambiguous, have reignited discussions about U.S. influence, control, and long-term intentions in Greenland. These statements were not isolated remarks. They were followed by military movements, diplomatic pressure, and unusually blunt language directed at Denmark and European allies. This is not simply about ownership or sovereignty. It is about control over future global infrastructure. The Arctic is becoming a new theater of competition. Russia has expanded military bases along its northern coast. China has declared itself a near-Arctic state and invested heavily in polar research and infrastructure. The United States, long dominant in global security, now views any erosion of its Arctic influence as an unacceptable strategic risk. Greenland, once peripheral, has become central. Inside Greenland, this shift has created unease. Many Greenlanders do not want to become a pawn in a global power struggle. The population is small, the land fragile, and the culture deeply tied to nature and self-determination. Yet the island's future is increasingly being discussed in foreign capitals rather than local assemblies. This tension between local identity and global interest is at the heart of the current crisis. What makes the situation especially volatile is that none of the major players are speaking in purely diplomatic language anymore. Words like inevitable, security necessity, and strategic reality are replacing the careful phrasing of international law. When such language appears, history shows that pressure soon follows. And pressure is exactly what is building around Greenland. From the American strategic viewpoint, Greenland is not a distant land. It is a forward defensive shield. U.S. military planners have long understood that the shortest path between rival nuclear powers runs directly over the Arctic. Missiles do not travel around the globe, they travel over it. Greenland, positioned beneath these trajectories, becomes a critical early warning and defense node. This reality explains why the United States never fully disengaged from Greenland after the Cold War. Even as budgets shifted and public attention faded, American military infrastructure remained. Surveillance systems, radar installations, and logistical planning never stopped evolving. What has changed now is the urgency. In Washington, the Arctic is no longer treated as a frozen buffer zone. It is now seen as an active frontline of future conflict. Defense analysts increasingly describe the Arctic as the next contested space, alongside cyber and outer space. In this framework, Greenland is not optional, it is essential. Recent American statements regarding Greenland must be understood through this lens. When US leaders speak of Greenland in terms of security necessity, they are not improvising, they are signaling long-standing strategic doctrine. The bluntness of recent rhetoric reflects a belief that time is no longer on America's side. China's growing interest in Arctic shipping routes, combined with Russia's expanding northern military presence, has triggered alarm within US defense circles. From this perspective, allowing any ambiguity over Greenland's alignment is seen as a vulnerability. But here is where strategy collides with diplomacy. Greenland is not an empty military platform. It is home to a people with political rights, cultural identity, and their own vision for the future. Denmark is a sovereign European state and a NATO ally. Applying pressure, economic, political, or rhetorical, carries consequences beyond the Arctic. Yet American policymakers increasingly appear willing to accept those consequences. Why? Because in moments of perceived strategic decline, great powers prioritize control over consensus. The logic is stark. It is better to face diplomatic backlash today than strategic disadvantage tomorrow. This logic has driven increased military coordination, high-level visits, and behind-the-scenes negotiations that rarely reach public view. While officials emphasize cooperation, the underlying message is clear. The United States intends to secure its Arctic interests by any means it considers necessary. This posture has unsettled European allies. Denmark, in particular, finds itself caught between loyalty to NATO, responsibility toward Greenland, and pressure from its most powerful ally. The traditional language of partnership is being tested by the realities of power imbalance. For Greenlanders, the American security narrative offers protection, but at a cost. Military presence brings infrastructure and investment, but also loss of autonomy and increased risk in any future conflict. The American perspective frames Greenland as a shield. The Greenlandic perspective increasingly fears becoming a target. Across Europe, the situation in Greenland has triggered deep concern, not because European leaders were unaware of Greenland's importance, but because the tone of the conversation has changed. What was once discussed quietly in defense briefings is now being spoken aloud in public forums. European officials fear that the precedent being set is dangerous. If strategic necessity becomes justification for political pressure on smaller partners, then the post-World War II order built on rules, sovereignty, and alliance consensus begins to erode. Greenland may be the immediate focus, but Europe understands that the implications extend far beyond the Arctic. Denmark's position is uniquely difficult. As the formal sovereign authority over Greenland, Denmark is responsible for defense, diplomacy, and international obligations. At the same time, Denmark must respect Greenland's growing demand for autonomy and self-determination. European unity depends on trust. When allies speak openly about bypassing that trust, fractures appear. In response, European institutions have accelerated discussions about Arctic security. The European Union has begun framing the Arctic as a shared strategic space, not merely a peripheral region. Investments in surveillance, infrastructure, and diplomatic coordination are increasing. But Europe faces a dilemma. It lacks the unified military power of the United States, yet it bears the political consequences of instability on its borders. Some European leaders advocate accommodation, finding ways to align US interests with European sovereignty concerns. Others warn that accommodation today could become submission tomorrow. Greenland, once silent in European debates, is now central to them. Public opinion in Europe is also shifting. Citizens who once saw the Arctic as remote are beginning to understand its relevance to energy security, climate policy, and geopolitical stability. The idea that borders in the modern world are negotiable based on power unsettles a continent shaped by painful historical memory. Europe's reaction is cautious, but increasingly firm. Amid all the strategic calculations, there is one voice that risks being overshadowed: Greenland's own. Greenlandic society is small, but resilient. Its people have endured colonization, cultural suppression, and economic dependency. In recent decades, Greenland has worked steadily toward greater autonomy, reclaiming language, governance, and identity. The current global attention feels less like recognition and more like intrusion. Many Greenlanders ask a simple question: why is our future being discussed everywhere except here? The promise of independence has always been complicated by economic reality. Greenland relies heavily on Danish financial support. Resource extraction could change that. but at environmental and cultural cost. Military interest brings jobs and infrastructure, but also risk and loss of control. This moment forces Greenland to confront a painful paradox. Visibility brings power, but also vulnerability. Political leaders in Greenland have called for calm, dialogue, and respect for self-determination. But they are aware that history rarely pauses for small nations to decide at their own pace. The Arctic is warming. The world is competing. Decisions are being made. Whether Greenland will emerge as an empowered actor or a contested space depends on what happens next. And what happens next will not be quiet. Though while much of the public focus remains on the United States and Europe, two other powers are deeply embedded in the Greenland equation, Russia and China. Neither is shouting. Neither is issuing dramatic public threats, but both are moving with patience, calculation, and long-term intent. Russia's interest in the Arctic is neither new nor subtle. The Arctic coastline represents Russia's northern lifeline, a strategic corridor linking its Atlantic and Pacific naval capabilities. Over the past decade, Russia has quietly rebuilt and expanded military bases across the Arctic, reopened Soviet-era airfields, and deployed advanced missile systems capable of operating in extreme cold. These moves are not defensive in nature alone. They are about shaping the future security architecture of the Arctic. From Moscow's perspective, Greenland represents a strategic variable. Any shift in Greenland's alignment, military or political, directly affects Russia's northern defense calculations. If Greenland becomes more tightly integrated into American defense infrastructure, Russia's early warning time shrinks. Its reaction window narrows. That is unacceptable to Russian planners. This is why Russian officials speak carefully about Greenland. They emphasize history, geography, and sovereignty, without making overt claims. The message is indirect but unmistakable. Destabilizing Greenland destabilizes the Arctic, and destabilizing the Arctic invites confrontation. China's approach is different, but no less significant. Beijing has framed its Arctic ambitions through economics and science. It calls itself a near-Arctic state, a phrase that raised eyebrows when first introduced, but has since become part of diplomatic vocabulary. China has invested heavily in polar research, icebreaker fleets, and Arctic infrastructure projects across multiple countries. Greenland, with its rare earth minerals, represents an opportunity China cannot ignore. These minerals are essential for modern technology, batteries, missiles, satellites, and renewable energy systems. China already dominates much of the global rare earth supply chain. Greenland could either strengthen that dominance or break it, depending on who controls access. 3:52 p.m., January 21, 2026. Javad Ali. Unlike the United States, China does not rely on military presence. It relies on investment, partnerships, and long-term dependency. Ports, airports, research facilities, and mining projects can all serve civilian purposes until geopolitical conditions change. This quiet competition makes Greenland a pressure point in a larger global contest. Every American base expansion is read in Moscow. Every European regulatory move is analyzed in Beijing. Greenland is no longer just an island. It is a signal, and signals. In geopolitics matter. If power politics are the engine of the Greenland crisis, climate change is the accelerant. The Arctic is warming nearly 4 times faster than the global average. Glaciers that once defined Greenland's isolation are retreating at unprecedented speed. Ice sheets are thinning. Seasonal ice coverage is shrinking. What was once unreachable is becoming navigable. This transformation changes everything. New shipping routes through the Arctic could reduce travel time between Asia and Europe by weeks. That is not merely an economic advantage, it is a strategic one. Control over these routes means influence over global trade flows, energy markets, and supply chains. Greenland sits near the center of these emerging corridors. As ice retreats, extraction becomes feasible. Oil, gas, and minerals that were once locked beneath ice are now within reach. But extraction in Greenland is not just an environmental question. It is a political one. Who decides? Who profits? Who bears the consequences? Climate change removes the natural barriers that once protected Greenland from attention. But it also removes the illusion that time is unlimited. Decisions delayed today may be forced tomorrow. Ironically, climate change has also made Greenland more militarily relevant. Ice-free waters allow greater naval movement. Longer operational seasons make permanent installations more practical. What was once a frozen buffer is becoming an open domain. This creates a dangerous feedback loop. Warming increases access. Access increases competition. Competition increases militarization. For Greenlanders, this is deeply unsettling. Climate change already threatens traditional ways of life, fishing patterns, hunting grounds, and coastal settlements. Now it also brings foreign interest, strategic pressure, and the risk of becoming a frontline in conflicts they did not choose. Climate change does not take sides, but it reshapes the battlefield. At the heart of the Greenland situation lies a fundamental question. Does international law still restrain great powers when strategic interests are at stake? On paper, the rules are clear. Sovereignty is inviolable. Self-determination is a principle enshrined in international law. Territorial integrity is protected by treaties and alliances. Greenland's status within the Kingdom of Denmark is recognized globally. But history teaches a harsher lesson. International law is strongest when it aligns with power, and weakest when it conflicts with it. When great powers perceive existential or long-term strategic threats, legal arguments often become secondary. This does not mean rules disappear. It means they are interpreted, stretched, or selectively applied. In the Greenland case, legal ambiguity exists in subtle forms: autonomy arrangements, defense agreements, resource rights, environmental exceptions. Each clause becomes a potential lever. Each interpretation becomes a bargaining chip. All sides publicly affirm respect for law. Privately, they prepare for outcomes that law may not prevent. This is why diplomacy around Greenland feels tense and fragile. There is no single red line, only overlapping thresholds. Economic pressure here, military signaling there, diplomatic language that grows sharper with each statement. The danger lies not in a single dramatic act, but in cumulative escalation. Greenland exposes the uncomfortable truth of the modern international system. Rules alone do not guarantee protection. They require enforcement, consensus, and restraint, qualities that are increasingly strained in a multipolar world. Greenland, situation, is still unfolding. No invasion has occurred. No formal transfer of control has taken place. Diplomats continue to meet. Statements are issued. Negotiations proceed. But the trajectory is clear. Greenland has crossed a threshold of attention from which it cannot retreat. Its future will be shaped not only by its people, but by forces far beyond its shores. The island has become a test case for how the 21st century will handle competition, climate change, and sovereignty. Will great powers cooperate to manage the Arctic responsibly? Will small nations retain agency in a world of strategic rivalry? Will climate change force collaboration or accelerate conflict? Greenland does not answer these questions alone, but the answers will be reflected there. The ice is melting, the world is watching, and history is moving faster than ever. Every era has a moment that reveals how power truly works. For the post-Cold War world, that moment may not come in the form of a single war or treaty, but through places like Greenland, quiet, remote, and seemingly peripheral. Greenland has become a stress test for the global order that emerged after 1945. For decades, the international system was built on assumptions that alliances would restrain ambition, that institutions would mediate conflict, and that economic interdependence would discourage confrontation. Greenland now challenges all three assumptions. What is unfolding is not an open conflict, but something more subtle and arguably more dangerous. A gradual normalization of pressure. Strategic language replaces diplomatic caution. Military planning advances ahead of political consensus. Economic leverage becomes a tool of persuasion. This is how the rules erode, not with explosions, but with precedents. If Greenland's future is shaped primarily by external strategic necessity rather than local consent, it signals a shift toward a world where power outranks principle. Other regions are watching closely. Small states, autonomous territories, and resource-rich regions understand that Greenland's experience may soon become their own. The New World Order is not announced, it is demonstrated. Greenland demonstrates that geography still matters, resources still matter, military positioning still matters, and in moments of strategic anxiety, even allies test the limits of one another's patience. This realization has deeply unsettled diplomats who spent their careers believing the Arctic would remain a zone of cooperation. Instead, it is becoming a mirror of global rivalry. Greenland's silence in earlier decades allowed the illusion of stability. Its current visibility exposes how fragile that stability really is. Lost in geopolitical analysis is the simplest truth. People live in Greenland, towns scattered along icy coastlines, families dependent on fishing, hunting, and fragile supply chains, cultures shaped by resilience, not conquest. These realities do not disappear simply because global powers take interest. Strategic decisions made in distant capitals translate into real consequences on the ground. Increased military presence alters daily life. Infrastructure projects reshape landscapes. Resource exploration threatens ecosystems that communities rely on for survival. Even uncertainty itself carries a cost. When people do not know whether their homeland will remain politically stable, economically autonomous, or environmentally protected, long-term planning becomes impossible. Investment hesitates. Young people leave. Cultural continuity weakens. Greenland's younger generation faces a dilemma few societies confront so starkly. Opportunity arrives tied to risk. Global attention brings funding, education, and connectivity, but also dependency and exposure. There is also psychological weight. To know that your homeland is discussed as a strategic asset, rather than a living society, creates alienation. Identity becomes secondary to utility. History shows that when human costs are ignored, resentment follows. And resentment, even when quiet, reshapes politics in unpredictable ways. Greenland's stability depends not only on treaties and military calculations, but on whether its people feel respected, rather than managed. The future of Greenland is not predetermined. Several paths remain open, but each requires deliberate choice. One path is cooperation. In this scenario, major powers acknowledge Greenland's strategic importance while committing to transparency, multilateral governance, and respect for local autonomy. Military activity is coordinated through alliances. Resource development follows strict environmental and social safeguards. Greenland gains greater economic independence without becoming a pawn. This path is difficult, but possible. Another path is confrontation. Strategic competition intensifies. Military presence expands. Diplomatic language hardens. Greenland becomes a permanent point of tension between rival powers. Even without open conflict, the region becomes militarized, polarized, and unstable. History suggests this path is easier to slide into than to escape. The third path is drift. No decisive agreements are reached. Pressure accumulates incrementally. Each step seems manageable, even reasonable, until suddenly the situation has changed beyond recognition. Autonomy erodes not by force, but by neglect. Drift is the most dangerous outcome, because it creates the illusion of control while removing it. Which path prevails depends on choices being made right now, often quietly, often behind closed doors. Greenland's future hinges not on dramatic announcements, but on cumulative decisions that either reinforce restraint or reward assertiveness. In the end, Greenland is more than territory. It is a question. It asks whether small societies can retain agency in an age of great power rivalry. It asks whether climate change will force cooperation or accelerate competition. It asks whether international rules still matter when strategic anxiety rises. The answer will not be written in one document or decided in one meeting. It will emerge over time, through actions more than words. Greenland's ice is melting, but its significance is solidifying. What happens there will echo far beyond the Arctic. It will shape expectations, embolden strategies, and redefine limits. The world once believed the Arctic was too cold, too remote, too empty to matter. Greenland proves otherwise. History does not always announce itself with noise. Sometimes it moves quietly, across ice, through warming seas, and into places the world once ignored. And when it does, the consequences last far longer than anyone expects.